A vast majority of wealthy individuals simply blend into the crowd, entirely unnoticed. Picture the following scenario. Every day, your colleague parks their vehicle right beside yours in the office lot. The vehicle in question is a 2011 Honda Accord sporting chipped clear coat and a minor ding on the passenger door, a blemish so old that your office mates have stopped joking about it. Naturally, you figure this guy is drowning in recurring debts or constantly hitting the limit on his charge accounts. The reality hidden from view is that he actually holds $5.2 million across various index portfolios. Furthermore, his primary residence carries absolutely zero mortgage debt. Every single paycheck he earns sits untouched, as his baseline survival costs are completely funded by the passive yield of his accumulated assets. It goes without saying that he possesses the ability to walk away from his job today, sustaining a plush lifestyle indefinitely while leaving his core capital entirely intact. The secret slipping past everyone is that his decision to drive that aging Accord was highly deliberate, highlighting a massive public misconception regarding the genuine appearance of prosperity. You might easily share a cafe table with someone residing in an ultra-exclusive zip code, completely oblivious to their status because their wardrobe consists of basic garments from a discount retailer. Individuals broadcasting the illusion of affluence and those possessing actual fortunes rarely overlap. Exhaustive sociological studies examining authentic high-net-worth households nationwide revealed that a dominant percentage of self-made rich folks reside in average suburban subdivisions, operate remarkably standard vehicles, and perfectly camouflage themselves within everyday society. The superficial markers we typically link to financial success, like premium sports cars, high-end fashion, and conspicuous consumption, are overwhelmingly displayed by high earners who successfully retain almost none of their cash. I am Pam, and in this session, I will guide you step by step through 9 distinct indicators proving someone possesses genuine, enduring capital, the exact variety that intentionally avoids the spotlight. Grasping these subtle clues proves exceptionally useful for a pair of distinct motives. Primarily, your eyes will open to hidden fortunes operating quietly in your immediate surroundings. Additionally, it becomes clear that the vast majority of these traits represent mental frameworks and daily habits you can immediately adopt, completely independent of your current salary bracket. Before unpacking our initial clue to spotting authentic millionaires, please tap that like icon and join our subscriber community to master the actual gears driving financial independence. Indicator number 1, revealing a stealthy fortune, is an absolute sense of tranquility during financial discussions. Observe closely the conversational rhythm of the truly affluent whenever monetary topics arise. If a specific price tag is mentioned, they avoid dramatic declarations of it being overpriced, steering clear of the typical vocal pitch that broadcasts anxiety or condemnation. They are far more likely to state the raw figure, noting it runs around $165. Their delivery remains completely flat and analytical, mirroring a casual chat regarding the afternoon forecast. The general population attaches intense emotional baggage to currency. It functions as a vessel for deep-seated worries, social ranking, embarrassment, and lofty dreams. Bringing up finances typically sparks either a defensive posture or a theatrical display. The average person will either minimize their fiscal stability to fit in or dramatically inflate their reality to project dominance. Some form of emotional turbulence is guaranteed. However, for those who have successfully amassed lasting riches, capital transitions strictly into raw data. They ask themselves what the expense is compared to the utility it delivers. They question whether a specific outflow aligns with predetermined goals they previously established. All the psychological burden evaporates once your underlying safety net reaches a critical mass. Classic financial literature from the late 1990s, heavily backed by contemporary studies, repeatedly highlights this exact characteristic among exceptional capital gatherers. This specific phrase was coined by academics to describe citizens whose ultimate net worth wildly outpaces their baseline earning history. These individuals discuss their assets exactly like a software architect breaking down system requirements. It serves as practical metrics, entirely divorced from ego or humiliation. A highly functional pattern emerges when you study this specific behavior closely. We can label it the triad of restrictive habits. They absolutely refuse to broadcast their annual earnings. They never drop hints regarding the purchase price of their personal property. Finally, their lifestyle choices demand neither extreme secrecy nor public validation. The capital merely sits there, silently functioning without demanding applause. Moving forward, the second indicator of a covert fortune is piloting an aging automobile that carries no outstanding loans. Comprehensive behavioral tracking spanning a half-decade compared the daily routines of affluent versus struggling citizens, discovering that 91% of self-generated millionaires intentionally avoid premium auto brands. Furthermore, 96% report never signing a vehicle lease. Even more telling, 58% strictly acquire pre-owned transportation. An automobile that screams economic hardship to the untrained eye frequently belongs to an individual commanding a portfolio stretching into the 7 or 8-digit range. Purchasing a fresh $55,000 vehicle instantly incinerates roughly 18% of its market equity the second the tires roll off the showroom pavement. As the initial 12 months conclude, that invisible tax often accelerates to drain 24 to 28% of the original tag. That initial $55,000 investment rapidly shrinks to an estimated $41,000, just a single year post-acquisition. The driver has faithfully surrendered $650 every single cycle, swallowed massive invisible equity losses, and currently holds a depreciating liability sitting far below the initial contract. In sharp contrast, the stealthy millionaire purchasing the half-decade-old iteration of that exact model forks over something between $24,000 and $27,000. The most brutal segment of the financial decay graph has already been absorbed by a stranger. This machine will continue to ferry them safely across town for an additional 7 to 10 years, requiring nothing beyond standard fluid changes. Any recurring financing note, assuming one even exists, represents a mere sliver of a brand new auto loan, though usually the recurring obligation is zero thanks to a flat cash transaction. The mathematical delta separating these two philosophies, when executed flawlessly across an entire career, translates to a staggering volume of wealth. Diverting a $650 monthly automotive obligation directly into a broad market tracker, compounding at an estimated 9% annual clip over a 3-decade horizon, effortlessly balloons into more than $1.1 million. The stealthy individual navigating that fully owned Honda is perfectly conscious of the fact that Mercedes-Benz dealerships operate nearby. They have simply run the long-term calculations. They fully recognize that acquiring the premium badge represents a vote for temporary status over actual financial sovereignty, firmly concluding the mathematical sacrifice is utterly foolish. Extensive analytical reviews regarding vehicular acquisition consistently point toward 3 to 5-year-old units hovering near 35,000 miles built by historically durable brands, simply because the prior owner ate the heaviest financial hit. The functional runway left on the engine remains incredibly vast. Progressing to the third indicator, an undercover millionaire eagerly deploys their capital toward remarkably dull yet highly functional upgrades. This serves as an incredibly accurate metric for separating genuine prosperity from theatrical spending. You merely need to investigate the final destination of their unallocated monthly surplus. An actor pretending to be rich aggressively funnels cash into highly visible markers. Fresh off the lot coups, heavily branded timepieces, trendy bistros boasting aggressive aesthetic designs, and tropical getaways optimized primarily for social media feeds. Conversely, a holder of true capital aggressively funds invisible systems that dramatically improve structural efficiency. They secure a brilliant certified public accountant whose tax mitigation strategies completely eclipse their hourly billing rate. They acquire bulletproof liability umbrellas to shield empires constructed over multiple decades. They purchase top-tier equipment relevant to their specific passions, ensuring total reliability and generational durability. They might retain an independent, flat-rate planner dedicated to maximizing the internal mechanics of their equity allocations. They finalize ironclad legal trust paperwork guaranteeing their life's work transfers flawlessly to their chosen beneficiaries. Not a single item on that list will ever generate viral traction on a digital feed. Yet, every single one exponentially secures and expands baseline prosperity as the calendar turns. The underlying philosophy driving this exact behavior is elegantly simple. Conspicuous consumption yields fleeting neurological spikes and hollow community envy. Those elements rapidly evaporate. Utilitarian deployment of capital, however, spits out perpetual dividends. A rigorously optimized legal deduction framework rescues massive amounts of capital annually for as long as the structure stands. Premium catastrophic coverage blocks an isolated stroke of bad luck from incinerating a lifetime of diligent saving. The aggressively uninteresting foundation of a heavily optimized fiscal household automatically harvests yields that ostentatious buying could never possibly replicate. Shifting to the fourth metric, an invisible millionaire exhibits extreme caution regarding minor outflows while acting with ruthless speed concerning massive, critical investments. This specific tendency appears completely paradoxical until you grasp the underlying operating system. You could easily witness a high net worth investor burning 45 minutes agonizing between two $90 pairs of denim from rival retailers, desperately trying to calculate the superior cost per wear. That exact identical human, upon learning their primary structure requires a new roof, will happily authorize a $19,500 bank transfer without breaking a sweat, seamlessly transitioning back to their daily tasks. When it comes to minor consumer goods, this compulsive investigative reflex strictly serves to calibrate and preserve a highly precise mental valuation algorithm. Mastering the true baseline price of a product versus its actual utility completely stops the insidious creep of microtransactions that seem harmless in isolation but compound into devastating portfolio drag over time. Surrendering 45 minutes of labor to analyze a $90 textile is never actually about the $90. It functions purely as a psychological exercise enforcing a strict mandate to absolutely never overpay for substandard utility at any tier of the market. Conversely, when confronting massive, obligatory capital deployments, the governing equation completely flips. Once an absolute necessity is verified, whether it is foundational property maintenance, a critical health intervention, or navigating serious courtroom exposure, the hidden penalty for stalling frequently eclipses the initial quote. The genuinely affluent comprehend this specific ratio on a cellular level. Procrastinating on a $16,000 weatherproofing overhaul strictly out of budgetary anxiety routinely triggers $45,000 in catastrophic interior molding just 18 months down the road. The misguided effort to protect the treasury through sheer avoidance ultimately multiplies the financial bleeding by nearly a factor of 3. Mere desires are meant to be scrutinized, pushed out into the future, and frequently permanently discarded. True necessities, the moment they are authenticated, are executed instantly and stripped of all emotional theater. The behavior you will almost never spot among the structurally wealthy happens to be the default setting for the broader public, specifically, rapidly pulling the trigger on luxury impulses while deliberately hiding from critical infrastructure bills because the big numbers trigger panic. Transitioning to the fifth clue, stealth wealth thrives on an absolute mastery over delayed gratification. In our current digital ecosystem, nearly any product is available via a solitary screen tap. The journey from initial craving to finalized order is compressed into agonizingly few seconds. Mobile platforms permanently hoard your credit digits. Physical retailers aggressively position inventory in high-traffic choke points to hijack your willpower. The overarching architecture of modern commerce exists solely to obliterate the friction between craving an object and finalizing the checkout, knowing fully well that any breathing room drastically lowers their conversion rates. Those possessing real fortunes have permanently shattered this consumer loop. They achieve this not through superhuman willpower, but by implementing a rigid protocol so repeatedly that it morphed into an involuntary reflex. For minor acquisitions, basically anything hovering below a couple $100, they enforce an uncompromising 48-hour freeze. The coveted object is relegated to a digital notepad. The final verdict is strictly reserved for 2 days later. Consumer behavioral studies repeatedly confirm that the overwhelming bulk of spontaneous purchase cravings completely evaporate within 48 hours if denied instant gratification. The absolute must-have gadget that dominates your brain at 9 at night on a Tuesday routinely reveals itself as completely ridiculous by Thursday morning, simply because the artificial dopamine spike has finally washed out of your system. For mid-tier financial choices bridging the gap between a few hundred and a couple $1,000, they implement a mandatory 10-day embargo. This window provides ample space for the intoxicating novelty to wear off, allowing a mathematically sound appraisal of the asset's true worth to take focus. When facing massive outflows, the kind of spending capable of leaving a visible dent in their annual balance sheet, they invoke a 30-day quarantine. This is absolutely not 30 days of pacing the floor in mental anguish. It is simply a 30-day incubation period, allowing the proposition to cool, letting routine existence prove whether the gap in their life is legitimate or merely a temporary aesthetic craving. An individual commanding an 8-figure portfolio who forces themselves to stall for a month before pulling the trigger is definitely not experiencing hardship. They are simply running their proprietary screening mechanism, the exact same psychological software that allowed them to amass that 8-figure mountain of capital in the first place. This firewall functions flawlessly because nearly all material yearnings, when starved of oxygen for a few weeks, naturally sort themselves into either actual operational necessities or fleeting vanity projects. Authentic requirements easily endure the cooling off phase. Spurious urges simply bleed out, mercifully taking the threat of capital destruction down with them. The magic of exponential compounding, the undisputed engine driving almost all multi-generational fortunes, heavily subsidizes this exact flavor of discipline on a macroscopic timeline. A single dollar deployed into the market at age 30 and completely ignored will balloon into roughly 4 times the final value at age 60 compared to a dollar aggressively invested at age 50. Massive net worth is rarely constructed by those rushing to the finish line. It is methodically bricked together by individuals capable of outweighting everybody else in the room. Arriving at indicator number 6, the invisible rich operate with a draconian grip over their baseline lifestyle expansion. Visualize your incoming cash flow as the fluid pressure coursing through a plumbing system. Your ongoing monthly overhead represents the physical diameter of that very pipe. In the broader population, the second that fluid pressure surges thanks to a salary bump, an unexpected commission, or a new title, they instantly install wider plumbing to accommodate the rush. They sign a pricier lease, finance a flashier vehicle, and upgrade their dining habits simply because the fresh cash seemingly demands it. Before 6 to 12 months have even passed, that elevated revenue stream is entirely absorbed by their bloated overhead, leaving them staring at the exact same pathetic savings rate they had a year prior. In many tragic cases, their margins actually shrink. Authentic accumulators of capital stubbornly refuse to upgrade the plumbing when the pressure spikes. Their top-line revenue accelerates rapidly. Their baseline survival costs refuse to budge, forcing an increasingly massive surplus directly into their investment accounts. A massive research initiative mapping the DNA of American affluence recently polled over 12,000 documented individuals holding a baseline net worth exceeding $1 million. The compiled data points were aggressively uniform and, to the uninitiated, deeply counterintuitive. The vast bulk of these high-net-worth respondents self-identified as meticulously frugal regarding mundane transactions. They strictly adhere to grocery itineraries, ruthlessly benchmark retail tags, and faithfully pilot reliable Japanese commuter sedans. A shocking demographic actually burns less capital in the supermarket aisles monthly than a median middle-class family. It is crucial to understand that they did not strike it rich and merely keep pinching pennies out of some quaint sense of tradition. These are citizens whose rigid operational discipline literally engineered their millions from scratch, and they possess the clarity to realize that abandoning those very behaviors will eventually erode the empire, even if their current cash flow could effortlessly underwrite a life of luxury. The tactical protocol these individuals execute the moment fresh revenue hits the ledger is beautifully straightforward. Whenever a salary hike or annual performance payout clears the bank, a rigidly locked ratio, typically 55% or heavily north of that, is immediately routed into brokerage accounts before the temptation to spend it can even register. Their daily existence is forced to adapt to the leftover scraps. The miracle of compounding math gets first rights to the fresh capital. The seventh behavioral clue pointing to covert riches is a fanatical obsession with optimizing hourly efficiency rather than simply hunting for the lowest price tag. In the earlier stages of accumulation, humans willingly sacrifice massive chunks of their calendar to save a few pennies across every chore. Reaching the upper echelons of net worth completely flips this dynamic. Capital becomes incredibly abundant, while remaining lifespan suddenly feels terrifyingly finite. Consider a portfolio holding $4 million, compounding quietly at a conservative 7% annual trajectory, automatically spinning off $280,000 in purely passive momentum every 12 months. Crossing that threshold dictates that every single 60-minute block they squander scrubbing floors or mowing lawns represents a catastrophic hemorrhage of high leverage potential. Operating at that altitude means applying their mental bandwidth toward their actual expertise yields an hourly return that completely dwarfs the localized cost of outsourcing the manual labor. This perfectly explains why the genuinely affluent gleefully write hefty checks for lifestyle friction removal that absolutely baffles the middle-class observer. Bypassing the layover completely on a commercial route demands a $450 premium. Contracting a residential cleaning crew permanently buys back 10 agonizing hours every month. A dedicated chief of staff violently defends their digital calendar. Outsourcing pantry restocking completely deletes the commute to the plaza. The internal dialogue completely stops asking about the baseline expense. The new metric strictly demands to know how much freedom is being purchased, and if the reclaimed bandwidth holds a higher market value than the cash surrendered. Cultivating a ruthless auditing system for your daily schedule, establishing a hard baseline dollar value for 60 minutes of your undivided focus, and routing your personal budget through that specific filter is a superpower these players activate long before the millions arrive, directly explaining their eventual success. They permanently retire the poverty mindset of checking their wallet capacity. They upgrade to interrogating the true nature of the transaction itself. Moving to the eighth characteristic, the undercover rich display icy emotional control the moment Wall Street violently corrects. When a severe macroeconomic contraction dominates the headlines, the vast majority of retail participants descend into absolute hysteria. They watch their brokerage balance bleed out, and the psychological sting of those tumbling numbers tricks them into believing the damage is terminal, completely ignoring the historical fact that equities have reliably rebounded from every single historical crash. Succumbing to the herd mentality, they wildly smash the liquidate button. They dump their holdings at absolute market floors, instantly crystallizing phantom volatility into catastrophic, irreversible capital destruction, only to angrily spectate from the sidelines as the inevitable bull run resumes without their participation. Those commanding authentic wealth execute the exact inverse playbook. They deliberately avoid logging into their trading apps during stretches of extreme turbulence. On the rare occasion they do review the damage, they refuse to authorize frantic restructuring. In fact, many aggressively deploy fresh cash reserves, deeply understanding that a plunging index is, from a mathematical perspective, simply a massive clearance event for top-tier companies that cost 20% more just 30 days prior. The broad American index has suffered horrifying downward spirals repeatedly over the decades. The infamous collapse in 1987, the massive tech bubble implosion that vaporized nearly 80% of the growth sector, the horrific credit freeze of 2008, and the sudden global lockdown plunge of 2020, every single one of those catastrophes, while unfolding live, generated paralyzing terror and incredibly persuasive narratives that the financial system was permanently broken. Yet, viewed through the lens of history, every isolated crisis served as a phenomenal wealth transfer mechanism for anyone possessing the mental fortitude to sit on their hands or increase their stakes while the weak hands folded. Institutional data from Tier 1 investment banks proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that getting locked out of merely the 10 most explosive trading sessions since 2009 drastically slashes an investor's annualized compound rate from a robust 17% down to a mediocre 11%. The most face-ripping green days almost exclusively detonate in the absolute dead center of the most chaotic economic storms. Exactly the moment when retail panic peaks and the psychological pressure to flee is overwhelming. The internal framing an 8-figure player utilizes when their screen bleeds crimson is incredibly basic. They are fundamentally uninterested in the quarterly earnings call. Their capital is firmly locked in for a 15 to 30-year marathon, and you must rapidly install that identical perspective before the next inevitable pullback strikes in 2026. The ninth and final indicator of an undercover millionaire is the total eradication of the competitive social mirror. The immediate realization that the guy next door, a corporate rival, or a heavily filtered digital influencer possesses a luxury item absent from your own life instantly triggers the most lethal wealth destruction trap designed for the working class. Desperately trying to match the spending habits of your social circle is not necessarily a moral failure. It represents a hardwired primate reflex that the modern marketing machine is brutally optimized to weaponize. High-end fashion houses routinely command a markup equivalent to 40 times the actual textile expense, purely for a stitched emblem. Motor vehicles are pitched globally as rolling manifestations of your dominance hierarchy, completely ignoring their fundamental job of moving you across asphalt. International travel packages are meticulously engineered to harvest digital envy just as much as they exist to provide actual relaxation. The silent rich crossed a mental bridge long ago, realizing that participating in this imaginary race offers zero tactical advantage, perfectly understanding that any dollar torched to protect their neighborhood standing are dollars violently stripped from their compounding freedom fund. A fascinating sociological deep dive revealed that whenever an individual strikes a massive state lottery jackpot, the frequency of insolvency filings in adjacent properties actually spikes dramatically over the subsequent calendar cycles. The core catalyst is that witnessing sudden, extravagant purchasing next door generates a subconscious pressure wave to elevate your own baseline. You simply adopt an ambient, highly toxic belief that financing a kitchen remodel or a pool is suddenly mandatory to defend your territory and match the evolving aesthetic of your zip code. The exact moment you sever that psychological leash, that invisible financial undertow completely loses its grip on your wallet. You forge a highly personalized blueprint of what prosperity actually tastes like. You double down on the specific utility that brings you genuine joy, entirely detached from the peanut gallery. The guy next door leasing a fresh electric truck is simply a guy who leased a truck. It might briefly catch your eye, but it exerts absolutely zero gravitational pull on your own asset allocation. Let us circle all the way back to the colleague occupying that parking space, the one navigating the 2011 Accord boasting the degraded clear coat. By this juncture, you undoubtedly grasp the calculated brilliance behind his automotive strategy. He deliberately avoids triggering a single radar blip associated with traditional affluence. The towering empire he has silently stacked in the shadows over multiple decades is the direct mathematical output of 9 specific disciplines, flawlessly executed without demanding a single round of applause. He dissects currency as raw structural data rather than a flex. He operates machinery he legally owns outright, while the cubicles around him eagerly sign predatory loans for fiberglass that rots faster than the principal balance. He aggressively funnels his surplus into legal tax shields, catastrophic risk mitigation, and broad equity trackers, while his peers endlessly hunt for temporary dopamine hits that literally decay into nothing. He obsessively interrogates minor retail tags but decisively executes massive infrastructure repairs the second they become verified threats. He purposefully injects friction into his consumer cravings, allowing the sheer passage of time to naturally assassinate the vast majority of his passing urges. His underlying burn rate remains violently static regardless of how high his corporate compensation climbs. He ruthlessly defends his calendar bandwidth with the identical ferocity that most humans reserve for defending their jewelry boxes. He maintains absolute emotional zero during violent macroeconomic corrections that force his department to liquidate their retirement accounts in terror, and somewhere along the journey, he permanently disabled the part of his brain that cared about external validation. The operator behind the wheel of that aged Accord actively leverages frameworks that completely eluded you and the rest of the payroll up until this very moment. Today, these mechanics are officially declassified, fully accessible to any individual willing to consistently execute them on the long, silent march toward absolute financial sovereignty. If you are curious why the mathematical landscape aggressively alters the moment you cross the $25,000 threshold, you should absolutely pull up the follow-up module located on your screen or browse my most recent upload, though hold off on tapping away for just a second. If your core objective is to ruthlessly compound your personal treasury, lock in your subscription right now. Fantastic! I will catch you in the next breakdown.